Hey everybody, it's Fett here in the control room of our test lab here at Azalea Studios in Nashville. And today I'm going to be talking about a new system that I'm really excited about called the HearBack Pro from Hear Technologies. Now, I'm a little bit biased in this review because I also a little while back reviewed the HearBack system, the original HearBack system, and was really impressed. So much so that I replaced the system I had here at Azalea Studios with a HearBack. And I've used it for a while now, so I'm intimately familiar with the system. And I was really excited when I heard that the HearBack Pro was coming out, and I was really looking forward to doing this review. So this is sort of a review, but also a little bit of a how-to guide because I am intimately familiar kind of with the concepts and the design of the system overall, and I really had to spend some time with it and get to know it well while I was evaluating it, so I figured might as well pass that on to you here in this review. So that's kind of where I'm coming from. The big difference between the original HearBack system, which by the way is still a completely viable system for people who don't need as many tracks and as many features and maybe a little bit lower cost than the HearBack Pro, but the major difference is that the new system builds on an architecture that's already excellent from the HearBack system and adds some really significant things. The first one being going from 8 channels to 16. And those are 16 independent channels that are independently adjustable throughout the system. Also, the system now will go from 44.1 to 192 kilohertz in terms of the sampling rate. So a lot of different options there as far as the sampling rate of the system. And they've also added some really cool features. They really did their homework and listened to their users. Things like panning independently on all 16 channels as well as volume control. And some really excellent enhancements like an intercom system. So I'm going to talk about all that stuff. Let's hook it up, have some fun, and put it through its paces. So let's start with an overview of the system. It's a personal monitoring system that is both modular and expandable, and I'll talk a little bit about what that means in a bit. But it's comprised primarily of 2 components. The first one is the HearBack mixer. This is what all the users of the system see. This is your 16 channels, and I'll go through a lot of detail on this in this review, but that's what all the users have and where most of the features are seen. And they're all connected by a hub, a 1 rack mount unit sized hub here that has all of the indications on the front about levels and that kind of thing, and all the connections in the back for the input and the output of the audio and so forth. And again, I'll go into a lot of detail on the hub as well. Those are the 2 main components. And the great thing about the way this system works, it's built around a gigabit Ethernet architecture. That means it's extremely fast. In fact, its inherent delay, if you will, at 192K is only 0.25 milliseconds. That's not 2 milliseconds, that's a quarter of a millisecond latency internally in the system, which from human ears is not able to be heard. Let's just put it that way. So very low latency. It runs over gigabit Ethernet, and therefore it's connected via, and this is one of the design features I love about the system, standard Cat6 cable. So it's got your standard wired RJ45 connector, just like you use in any Ethernet network, and every single station is connected to the hub via a Cat6 cable. But what's great about this design is it's not just the audio that's passed back and forth through the Cat6 cable, but also power. So you don't need any kind of external power or any extra wiring or anything like that to run each station. And again, that's up to 32 stations on a single hub. The default configuration is 8 or 16, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But they're all connected with the Cat6 cable. Another couple of things I want to talk about here. We reviewed the 4-pack system, which means that the system comes with 4 mixers, a hub, all the cabling, and also comes with 2 analog cards for the audio input that come also with 2 custom cables. These are DB25 DA88 style wiring, and that means that there's a DB25 connector on one end and 8 balance connectors on the other. So there are 2 of these, so you get 16 analog inputs by default and the cabling that come with them in the 4-pack system. And there's a couple of accessories in this review that I want to mention that I really recommend. First is this little gizmo right here This is a little swivel mount for a mic stand, and when you screw the mixer on top of it, as I'll show later on, and then you screw this other end to the top of a mic stand, you can swivel this thing 180 degrees, and it's really, really great for getting the right angle. The other thing, which is brand new with the HearBack Pro, is this little baby right here. This is an XLR microphone that connects to the aux-in mic connection in the back of the mixer, so everybody can use one of these for the intercom system. I really recommend getting one of these if you intend to use the intercom, because it's a super mic that's really, really well designed and matched to the system very, very well. So that's what we're going to be talking about. I'm going to go into more detail on each of the pieces, but that's the overview. There's just a couple other things I want to mention about the Ethernet backbone of this system and the cabling. Again, it runs over gigabit Ethernet, which means it does not run on 10100 Ethernet systems, and it also uses Cat6 cable, not Cat5 or Cat5e. Now, the good news about the Cat6 cable, again, I mentioned before that it's standard wiring. It's been around for quite a few years, ever since there's been gigabit Ethernet. It's readily available, and it's very, very inexpensive. But I want to stress that they talk a lot in the manual about getting good quality cable, not having a lot of couplers or breaks in the connections across the cabling. And if you do that, you get distances of a minimum of 100 meters, that's about 328 feet, and all the way up to 500 feet between stations and between separate hubs that you can daisy chain together for an unlimited size system. So it's definitely worth it to either buy the cables that come from HEAR Technologies or go out and buy good quality Cat6 cable, because it just doesn't cost that much. I recommend using colored cable because there's a lot of that available out there, so you know which end is which on each of the different stations that you've got connected to the hub, or at least put little electrical tape, colored electrical tape at each end of the cable so you know what's what. The very last thing I'd like to mention about the gigabit backbone is that you can even use gigabit Ethernet switches with it, as long as they don't have the energy efficient kind that actually shut down the network and don't pass packets back and forth in a full duplex mode at all times. But you can actually extend your network, your Ethernet network over which this system runs, using standard gigabit Ethernet switches. And they talk about some models that they've already tested in the manual, which, by the way, is a really, really excellent manual, which is very common with systems that you get from HEAR Technologies. This is a great manual. The fact that it's so thin, even though it's in multiple languages, is a testament to how intuitive and easy to use this system is. So very good, but very short manual to read, and they talk about things like the cabling and the coupling and which switches do and don't work with the system and that kind of thing. So I really recommend going online and downloading the manual if you haven't got the system yet and looking through it. It'll tell you a lot about how to set the system up, what its capabilities are, and how to use it. So let's move right on to talking about the mixer. I'm going to pick up one of these things here and show you. All of the mixers, by the way, are the same. They all look like this. And I'm going to go over the layout of the mixer and also what some of the connections are and what have you before we proceed. The first thing you've actually got on the mixer is a great LED indicator at the top that is used not only to show that the system is running normally and there's power when it turns blue, but also it turns other colors to indicate problems for troubleshooting, which I think is a great feature and something that is really a good design addition to this system. Then you've got 16 knobs here, and above each knob you've got scribble strips that you can write on with a dry eraser marker. Don't write with permanent marker or it'll be permanent. But each of these knobs controls different parameters for each channel of 16 channels of audio here. Then at the bottom here, you've got a pan button, which has multiple functions. I'll talk about those. You've got an aux button. You've got a master volume knob that has multiple functions. You've got a preset button for recalling and storing presets, and then you've got the intercom button. So that's the front of the face of the thing. I also want to mention, you can't really see this very well on the camera right here, but along the bottom here, one of the things they did really well is they put some little icons to indicate the connections that are on the bottom. So you don't actually have to look up under the thing to hook the wiring up. If you just look at the icon and line it up, the plugs for those icons are directly below where the icons are. So that's a really good feature. So that's the face of the mixer. One more thing I want to mention about the face of the mixer before I move on is that up above each of the knobs, you've actually got multicolor LEDs that indicate what you're doing and what the values are as you're making changes. So you don't really see those yet because we haven't got the system turned on, but I wanted to mention them as part of the face of the mixer. Now, on the back of the mixer, we've got two things. We've got a mount for a mic stand. I mentioned at the beginning of this review that I recommend using the little swivel adapter as well. So you can either screw this directly into the top of a mic stand so it sits like this, or you can screw it into the top of a swivel mount and then have it a little bit more mobile on top of the mic stand as well. The other thing you've got on the bottom is a great channel here that protects the Cat6 cable and the RJ45 connector, both on the unit and on the cable itself. So the cable plugs in at the bottom here, and you run the cable through here to keep it secure at all times, and then you forget about it. So that's the back of the unit. Now, right here in the front, on the bottom, I mentioned before that we've got the little icons up here that you can't really see on camera right now that indicate where these connections are. But the first one is the RJ45 connector, standard Cat6 cable RJ45 Ethernet connector. Next to that, you've got two headphone outputs that you can use simultaneously. One is a 1/4 inch stereo and the other one is an 1/8 inch stereo. So no matter what kind of headphones you've got an output for that. And also there's a left and a right line out on the bottom here that can also be used simultaneously with the headphone outputs. Now, if you just plug into the left output, you're going to get mono, and if you plug into both of them, you're going to get stereo. So you've got RJ45 connector for the Cat6 cable that passes the power and the audio. You've got two great headphone outputs with lots and lots of headroom and tons of power. And you've also got a stereo line out that you can use for all sorts of things. Like if you use this in a live situation, you can send it to in-ear monitor systems, you can send it to wedge monitors, you can send just the left mono to a sub for the drummer, all sorts of things. In fact, what I'm going to do in this review is I'm going to use these line outs to record the audio of everything I'm doing. So as I'm describing all the changes and turning things up and down and everything else, I'm going to be recording the line outs on this mixer so you can actually hear exactly what I hear while I'm doing the review. So all sorts of really cool uses for that. So that's the front part of the bottom, and on the back you've got a couple more connectors. Basically this is where the aux connections and selection are made. First of all, you've got an 1/8 inch stereo aux in here where you can connect something like a cell phone, an MP3 player, a mobile device, anything like that for auditioning, anything you might want to use it for. And over here you've got an XLR mic input with phantom power to use as an aux input, so you can use it for a more me system if you play an acoustic instrument. You can use it for crowd or ambient noise in a live situation, and you can also use it for the intercom mic. So it's got multiple uses there. And then you've got a switch in between these two on the back to select whether you're using the line in or the mic in for the aux. You can't use them both together, so you select whichever one you want from this switch. Now, there aren't any icons or anything on the front, but what I like about this, I got used to this very quickly. As I was using this unit, I just reached back here and it was really easy to feel where that selection switch was, and I was able to flip it really easily. So that's a quick overview of the mixer. We're going to go into a lot more detail on the features in a bit. Moving right along, let's talk a little bit about the hub here. As we had an overview of the mixer. Here's an overview of the hub. We'll talk more about it shortly. First of all, you've got on the front here an LED indicator, just like you've got on the mixer. It glows blue when things are going well, but it also has a bunch of other colors that it gives if there are system problems. Great for troubleshooting. Next to that, you've actually got the indicator for the sample rate of the system. Again, the digital sample rates go anywhere from 44.1 kilohertz all the way up to 192K, and it tells you right on the front what the sample rate is. You've also got the LED indicators. There are 4 different color indicator lights on here for each 16 of the 16 channels, so you can see the signals on your audio and also whether you're clipping or overloading. Next to that, you've got a switch to select your input, and it's one of 2 slots in the back or the H-bus, which we'll talk about in a moment. And then you've got a power switch here, and right above the power switch you've got a little indicator that says whether or not you're using 2 power sources. 2 power sources. You might be saying, well, that's one of the great features about this system is it actually has redundant power. So if you're using the HearBack Pro system in an area where it's really mission critical, there's actually 2 power connectors to the system, and if one goes out, the other one will continue to run the system. So that's a really great feature. There's also some other ways that it's used, but that's really its main function, is to be redundant power. So right here on the back, you've got your first power source right here, power supply, then your second power supply connector. Yes, they do connect with XLR-like looking connectors, although they're 4-pin and not 3-pin. And next to that, you've got the H-bus connectors in and out. Now, H-bus is the protocol that you can use to daisy chain multiple hubs together. And again, you get up to 500 feet distance between them. So if you're in a multi-stage environment in the live world, or if you've got multiple studios in a complex in the recording world, or things are just very far apart, you can actually daisy chain hubs one to the other for basically an unlimited size system. And each of the hubs can have up to 32 stations on it. So you can get an idea how quickly you can magnify the size of the system very easily with the H-bus connector. Next to that is a really nifty feature, a USB connector. Now, I, as a reviewer of the system, got it pretty early, and I had to upgrade the firmware using the USB connector with my laptop. It was dead easy and took maybe a couple of minutes to do it. So not only is it good for upgrading the firmware, but it's also good for adding features and that kind of thing later on. Now, next to that, you've got 2 sections, slots, input A, they're called, and B, and slots 1, 2, 3, and 4 from left to right. The 4-pack system that we're reviewing here today actually comes stock. In input A, you've got the 16 analog inputs that I mentioned come into the DB25 connectors at the beginning of the video here. And then it comes with 1 output card in slot 4 for 8 stations. So even though the 4-pack system comes with 8 mixers, you can actually have, 4 mixers, you can actually have a total of 8 hooked up to the hub that comes standard. So if you decide you want to upgrade and add some mixers to it, you don't have to do anything new on the hub. You've got 8 total outputs to start with when you buy the 4-pack. So that's a really great feature. So the thing is also built out of solid metal. It's built like a tank basically, and that's something I should probably mention about the mixer. The mixer is only 1.6 pounds. It's super lightweight, but it's built out of really super hard, rugged plastic. So it's pretty indestructible, but very lightweight for carting around if you need to do that. In fact, if you buy the 4-pack system, you can actually get a little bag for it and carry the thing around. It's dead easy for one person to carry one of these systems around because they really don't weigh anything at all. Just a couple more things I want to mention about the hub before we move on. If you use 2 power supplies with the slots 3 and 4 filled with output cards for the RJ45 Cat6 connections, you can then run redundantly with redundant power. If you want to have more than 16 stations or 16 mixers output, in other words, all 4 slots are filled, then you have to use a second power supply in order for there to be enough power to go to all of the mixers in the system. So that's the first thing I wanted to mention. The second thing I wanted to mention was I only talked about the analog cards and the output for the mixers here, but you can configure this system any way you want. It's really easy to swap out these cards. Now, by the time this review comes out, I believe that the ADAT card will already be available. So there are different formats that you can use simply by swapping the cards in and out, both input and output. So I wanted to mention here that although all we're showing here is the analog connectors and 1 card for 8 mixers, there's lots and lots of different configurations that you can use with the hub. Well, since we're talking about hooking up the system, let's go ahead and do some of that now. First thing, of course, you're going to need for the hub is a power supply, and this is a really nice heavy-duty power supply that comes with the system. So it plugs into a standard AC 3-prong outlet. Then the connector here goes into the first power supply connector there on the back, so that's all that takes. Again, we have 2 cables, each with 8 channels of analog audio, and I'm just going to hook up one for now to show you how easy it is to do, but there's the DB25 connector. on this end. The other end has got 8 1/4-inch balanced analog connections, which we'll see later on. And then last but not least, we've got to get a RJ45 connector going out here. So each station plugs into that, and we're hooked up with a hub. Setting up the mixer is just about as easy as setting up the hub. There may be more connections, but it's a pretty straightforward process. The first one we're going to do is hook up that RJ45, which supplies both the power and the audio. Then we take the cable that we've hooked up there, and we string it through the channel protection there so the cable doesn't have too much strain on it. And we're off and going. We'll also connect it to our little adapter here that connects it to the mic stand. So we'll screw that in the bottom here, and that's what's going to go onto the mic stand later when we move ahead and start using the system. So that just screws right in the bottom here. Of course, I'm fumble fingers. It's not the fault of the connector. It's actually me. There we go. So that just screws right in there. On the bottom, it's nice and rock solid, and then it will swivel whichever way we want it to on the mic stand. So that takes care of that. Let's continue on the bottom then here. I'm going to hook up 2 sets of headphones. First of all, a 1/4-inch set of headphones and also an 1/8-inch set of headphones. So one of the great things about this design is if you happen to use studio phones, for example, that always have a 1/4-inch connector on them, great. If you happen to use a very small headphone that you use with your iPod or something like that, that has an 1/8-inch connector, you can connect that in too. So I've got them both connected here. Now what we're going to do with the line outs in this case is we're actually going to connect them up to the recorder that's getting all the audio output. So we're going to use these 1/4-inch balanced connectors going out left and right stereo. So that takes care of all the connections on the bottom. Now we'll move to the top. And we're going to connect, first of all, I'm going to hook up my cell phone because I want to be able to listen to some audition or maybe work version tapes here in the studio in the middle of a session. So I'm taking the little 1/8-inch output from my headphone out on my cell phone. I'm plugging that into the line-in 1/8-inch stereo connector on the back. And last but not least, we're going to connect up this wonderful mic that I mentioned before for our, not only a More Me system in the studio in this case, but also for the intercom. And the great design feature here is this thing is its own mount. So the XLR cable rather goes right into the XLR connector. You don't need any extra cabling or anything like that. You just plug the mic straight in, and it also works on a gooseneck. And they were even nice enough to put a little windscreen on there. So that's it. I can now have both a More Me or a crowd ambient sound adjustment, or I can also use it for the intercom. So now we've got the mixer all hooked up as well. One little thing I do want to mention before we get rocking here is to explain the setup we have here with my particular configuration, because I am actually a Hearback user. I'm a user of the original Hearback system, which I've had in here for a couple of years and really come to rely on. So everything in my setup is oriented towards that. So what we did to be able to compare apples and apples is we just swapped out the Hearback system with the Hearback Pro and basically kept the same connections and setup coming out of the recording system. So what we've got is I'm working in my DAW of choice here, which happens to be Steinberg's Cubase. And what we're doing is we're using sends on each channel to go out to my audio card, and then from my audio card into my mixer. And the reason I do that is because I use the mixer, first of all, for recording. So it's already part of the process that I'm doing, but also because I happen to like the TalkBack on my mixer that I've been using for quite a few years. So that gives me the ability to use the TalkBack without the computer even being involved. So coming out of Cubase into the sends, through my audio card into the mixer, and then all we did was we just took the 8 Omni outs that happened to be 8 analog balanced outs on this particular mixer and sent them straight into the first card, the first slot of 8 analog channels on the Hearback Pro hub. So we are coming 8 channels out of my board into the analog inputs on the hub. We could have just as easily done 16, but I'm doing a 1-for-1 comparison. The Hearback system only had 8 channels, but if I wanted to, I could send 16 out. But for the purposes of this illustration, we're just going to use 8 channels. And in the particular recording we're using, that's plenty to illustrate what it is we want to say. All right, with that in mind, let's do it.